Rafael Vinoly Architects recently received the 2020 Scientific Equipment and Furniture Association's Laboratory of the Year Award for the laboratory that they completed for Rockefeller University in New York City. SEFA is the organization that publishes and monitors the highest standards for the design and fabrication of laboratory furniture and laboratory equipment. This Laboratory of the Year award is especially significant in that the jury is comprised of lab planners, architects, manufacturers, fabricators, design critics, architectural journalists, leaders and administrators of some of the most prominent laboratories in the world. For that reason, it is the most prestigious award that a laboratory building can achieve. To give you some background on Rockefeller University, it was founded in 1901 as the first biomedical research laboratory in the United States. The hospital was built in 1910, and it was the first translational research institution in the country. There are two characteristics that set Rockefeller University aside from other institutions. It has an open structure that encourages collaboration. Every researcher reports directly to the president of the university. And it has a philosophy that it isn't focusing on particular fields, but it recruits scientists that it thinks have high future potential. As a consequence, it has the 26 Nobel laureates, which is more Nobel laureates than in the country of France, 24 Lasker Awards, 20 National Medal of Science, 39 National Academy of Science members, and 17 National Academy of Medicine members. As I mentioned, it's located in a dense urban environment on the eastern edge of the island of Manhattan on the East River, just east of Central Park in the densest part of New York City. This is a photograph taken in 1916 when the first 4 buildings had been built over the first 15 years of the university's life. Founders Hall is the original lab building and administration building. To the left of that is the second laboratory building, which is Flexner Hall. And then to the right of Founders is a residence for nurses who worked in the building on the far right, which is the hospital. Again, the first translational research institution in the United States. Over the next 30 years of its life, the buildings continued to be built along the eastern edge of the campus, overlooking the East River, and each one is connected above grade with bridges or breezeways, and below ground sitting on actually a building that's built into the side of the cliff that houses mechanical systems servicing the buildings above. This is the site plan of the campus in 1930. Again, I want to emphasize that it's all connected buildings, low-rise to mid-rise, all with individual architectural expressions, but connected with physical connections. Then in the 60s, you start seeing pavilions and high-rise buildings being built, pavilions in the park with no connection to the original buildings on campus. And then from the 70s to 2000, there was a burst of construction, again, high-rise laboratories, 17 to 20 stories tall with small floor plates and large central cores. And they also they added housing to the campus for professors and faculty. About 10 years ago, they also began renovating the original buildings, which were 100 years old at that time, updating the laboratories with the state-of-the-art equipment, but the constricted floors and lack of daylight were not able to be altered. There were 2 objectives that they asked us to achieve in developing or designing a new laboratory. And that was to develop a laboratory that would provide maximum interaction among researchers in support of science, recruitment, and retention of their world-class researchers. They also asked us to provide a diverse variety of collaborative and communal spaces, and that included dining halls, conferencing facilities, recreational facilities, and offices that reinforced the campus relationships. And then the campus is quite beautiful, very well landscaped, very well maintained, and the third objective was to preserve and enhance the campus landscape, maintain the views of and from the historic buildings, and reinforce the pedestrian scale of the campus. We looked at every building on campus, and we looked at all the available sites and identified 3 potential sites for future laboratory space. Each one offered a distinct massing for the same program. Option 1 would result in a 14-story building. Each one would hold about 16,700 square meters of research. Option 2 would be a 6-story building, and option 3 would be a 2-story building that would actually be built over the highway that separated the university from the East River. You can see here the 3 massings. There's the 14-story tower. This would be the 6-story low-rise, mid-rise building, and then a 2-story building with 3 cores, multiple entrances that was built to the east of the existing original campus. We elected the option that provided for the 2-story building built above an active highway and connecting all of the original buildings, as well as some new construction and some renovated construction. So we selected the building with the largest possible floor plan that would provide the greatest amount of flexibility and the greatest amount of community within the building, so that researchers were not segregated by floor, but were in in 2 levels of continuous space. So what is the elemental approach to the design and planning of laboratories? We see that there are 3 types of spaces in a research building: office and write-up desks, benches, support spaces, and wet walls. Collaborative spaces, meaning conference rooms, break rooms, lounges, things like that. We surveyed every single building on campus and identified the amount of area for enclosed offices, for benches, support space, and common space. And then we graphed all of those buildings and identified the area for the lab bench related to the enclosed office and related to the common areas in each building. And then on top of that, we graphed the number of researchers in each one of the spaces. And as you can see, there is not a direct relationship between the number of researchers in a laboratory and the space that the laboratory occupies. And that's because a mature institution like Rockefeller with small floor plates tends to have labs grow and contract, but you can't backfill because you don't have enough space to bring in a new laboratory, and you don't have enough space for a current laboratory to just expand on the same floor. It has to wait till space opens up. So this is the argument for large floor plates that allow easy expansion and contraction as laboratories grow or decline over time. If you draw an average of the number of occupants in every laboratory on campus, you find that there's about 18 researchers with a principal investigator occupying each lab. We found that if you looked a little bit further, about 40% of the laboratories were one principal investigator with 8 researchers, and about 60% of the laboratories had a population of one principal investigator with 24 researchers. So we knew we needed a plan that would allow for a diversity of lab sizes without wasting space or becoming inefficient. So you return to the 18 average to do our plan calculations, and we said that for each researcher we would have 18 write-up desks, 18 benches, and slightly more than double the amount of support space. And then we would add additional for each 4 labs, there would be a break room and a conference room that could be shared by the 4 labs, with the conference room being big enough to hold 24 people if in fact a laboratory grew to that size. And then all those labs would share into a lobby that was common to the whole building. So the net area per principal investigator was 327 net square meters for each 18-person laboratory. And then we compared that to several of the labs on campus and other laboratories that we had done, most notably the Howard Hughes Medical Institute. The new laboratory building is on the bottom right, and you'll see there that we've minimized the amount of common space within the building because it ties into several buildings on campus that have conference facilities. So we were able to maximize the actual area allocated to research. We distributed small common spaces within each lab, but the larger conference rooms that would hold 50 or 20 people are satisfied by existing buildings on campus. You can also see that we minimized the amount of enclosed offices so that there was only one closed office for each principal investigator, as opposed to having multiple closed offices for support personnel and researchers. Effort was to keep an open environment, collaborative environment, where everybody was engaged with what your neighbor was doing. So we had a plan that was going to hold 26 principal investigators with 494 researchers. That was the program. And then in 2018, when the building opened up, we found that we had 23 principal investigators with 462 researchers, and they occupied slightly less than what we predicted, 8,230 net square meters. So we were able to accommodate labs from size of 6 researchers to 30 researchers in a space that was planned on an average of 18 researchers per principal investigator. And here you can see how the projection of support space went from 37 to 39%. So there was an increase in the need for bench area, So the bench area increased. The enclosed offices were basically the same. Open offices took up slightly less area, and then the lab and common spaces are about as projected. So how do we look at organizing these elements? The Van Andel Institute, a laboratory that we did, had the benches with write-up stations in a band, separated by circulation from support spaces, and then separated again by circulation from closed offices. In the Howard Hughes Medical Institute, all the closed offices were on one side, write-up desks and benches were in the middle band, and support was at the rear of that building. And then, as an example of one building on campus at one of the older laboratories, you see support space in the middle of the plan, benches with write-up desks connected to them, and closed offices on each floor. We made a specific decision to separate the write-up desks from the lab benches for several reasons. One is it promotes a greater sense of community because now all the people working at write-up desks are adjacent to each other, and it actually creates a much safer environment that you're not working next to hazardous materials, and it improves the ability to socialize. So here you see the decision that Rockefeller, compared to the other 3 examples we discussed. At the top, there's closed offices and all of the write-up desks along one wall of the building. The benches are in the middle of the building, and support is in a band at the rear of the building. And here you see the result of that planning. To the right is floor-to-ceiling glass with all the write-up desks. There are principal investigator closed offices, and the break rooms and conference rooms punctuate the space along this, what's basically a 300-meter long corridor. And then to the left, you see the benches, and beyond behind the benches are the support space. So the flexible integrated laboratory has the dry lab office in write-up and the wet lab in support. And everything is designed in a modular way on a 600 grid so that 3 write-up stations can replace 2 benches, or 2 benches can be put into the space of 1 office, and you can plug and play. The partitions can be built with the same system that's supporting the benches or the write-up stations. And we wanted to be able to move benches into support space if the need for bench space increased. We wanted to be able to have support space move into bench space so that you weren't fixed the predetermined ratio for each lab between bench and support, and that proved to be enormously successful in the final project. And then all the write-up stations and the offices were along the eastern wall of the building, which, as I mentioned, is floor-to-ceiling glass and can be interchanged and converted from write-up stations to closed offices, all within a modular system. And every one of these potential moves was explored as we fitted out the laboratory after it had been 90% completed, and we interviewed the researchers entering the building. So this is just showing a variety of ways of taking the same space and using it for bench support or closed collaborative environments or private offices. And specifically, I'll take you through some drawings and photographs of the resulting project. There's the East River, the original building. Looking at, we extended the campus out, added about 10% more open land area to the campus with green roofs and collaborative pavilions set in the garden. Here you see the section, and this is the most important drawing that I'm going to show you, that from the campus side, which is to the right, you climb up to the original buildings, a slight slope, and that slope then continues up very gradual stairs onto the roof of the river campus, so that from the original Rockefeller University landscape, you do not see the new building at all. It's completely integrated into the landscape and then tied at multiple points into existing buildings, so that there's one front door, but there are many, many individual doors from each one of the original buildings that are over 100 years old. This is the actual floor plan after we had met with researchers and satisfied their programmatic requirements, and you see the break room and conference rooms shared by 4 researchers. You see the bench space. We added flexible support spaces, which is built from the same casework system as supporting the benches, and served through an underfloor system of power, data, and gases. And then you see the equipment corridor, wet wall, separating the bulk of the support spaces from the bench space. This is a view of the campus from the East River. You see the green roof, you see the 2 horizontal planes of uninterrupted laboratory space, and then to the right is a conference center that is shared by the hospitals and other research facilities in the neighborhood. And here you see the way the roof landscape is tied back into the lush campus landscape that's been extremely well maintained over the life of the university. Again, campus gardens, we renovated a walkway along the East River for bicycles and pedestrians. We built a wall that separates the traffic noise from those people using the river walk, and then you see the way the campus walkways spread out into the garden, connecting to a dining hall to the left and an administrative building with the deans and president of the university to the right. And this is what you see of the building from the main campus. There's trellises to either side of a very gentle stairway. Two of these stairs, one on each side of the original Founders Hall, and the plants are already growing across these trellises so that the carpet of green that you walk through as you enter the campus extends right up onto the roof of the river campus. This is the other stairway. You see one of the original bridge connecting the 1901 building to a 1906 nurses' residence, which is now an administrative building. There's one common collaborative space on each level, at the center of each level, so it's shared by roughly 13 laboratories on each of the 2 floors. And then there's an amphitheater that is an extension of those collaborative spaces for outdoor dining and for musical performances in the summer months. This is the administration building set into the lush landscape, and this is the dining commons, again with outdoor seating, views across the East River, an interior shot of the dining with large tables. There's no small individual seating. Everything is, everybody has to sit at a large table with fellow researchers and share their daily meals. The president's office, again with views out into the garden. This is the conference center that's shared by Rockefeller University and Memorial Sloan Kettering and all of the New York Hospital, all of the hospitals that are in this neighborhood. Then when you're looking closely at the laboratories, this is the bench space. You're looking across circulation to the write-up stations, which are along the glass wall. Another shot of the laboratory benches, which are supported on these service modules, which connect to the floor, and all the utilities come from below the raised floor. And so every bench can move on a module of 600. This is one end of the campus. Again, you see the write-up stations independent from the benches in an environment that's much quieter and much safer and much more collaborative, because you're rubbing shoulders with fellow researchers, not stuck into the corner of a dead-end lab bench. There's a wet wall that runs the 300 meters on each floor that has all of the plumbing, and then behind that are all of the fume hoods and more fixed equipment that is not as easily adjustable as the benches and the write-up stations are. And then in the middle of the bench space, this is a support room that's built out of the same vertical service modules with flexible partitions, and these can be demounted, and you can increase the size of the support area or replace it with benches as the lab needs change. And then there are equipment corridors running, separating laboratories and running the 300-meter length of each floor. Principal investigators' offices, again with views of the East River. Conference rooms and break rooms are in the same zone as the write-up stations and offices, so they have views out to the east. And then this is a image of the public walkway, bicycle way that the university donated to the citizens of the city of New York.
Rafael Vinoly had an inspired vision to use our air rights over the FDR Drive, which David Rockefeller had wisely acquired for the university in the 1970s. The centerpiece of this plan was a new research building. The plan was to build 19 steel and concrete platforms, swing it into place over the FDR Drive, get it in place, clear and open the FDR Drive all within 1 hour. And this had to be done 19 times.
That June night in the summer of 2016, when we were hoisting that first module, to pull that off successfully over the FDR Drive from a tidal river in the middle of the night, my heart was racing.
You walk into the building and you think, oh my God, if I could work here, I could do great things.
Working at Rockefeller was an incredible opportunity for any, emerging scientist, but to add the river campus in, it's a game changer.
The opportunity to work in the Kravis Research Building definitely played a major role in my decision to come to Rockefeller.
It's got junior investigators mixing together with senior laboratories, other junior investigators, all in an open environment.
On one side of my lab will be the Zhao Lab and the Jarvis Lab. On the other side, my neighbor will be Amy Shire, who is a recent recruit just like me and who has an interest in biophysics, which is the field that I came from.
The Kellen BioLink will be terrific convening space for the local, national, and international scientific communities.
This is going to be bringing leaders from around the world here on the Rockefeller campus to this new BioLink building.
Bass Dining Commons is another terrific element.
It'll revive the tradition that we had long ago of everybody eating at communal tables and sharing ideas.
That's where so many amazing scientific stories were born.
There is nothing more welcoming to the human soul than to be on green, overlooking the water and the sky. A garden is truly good for all of us. The scientists lead such intense lives. For them to be in an open space with themselves or with other scientists, I think it helped to inspire them and to invigorate them to do the very best they can.
And then I want to close by briefly summarizing the evolution of our laboratory casework designs. This is a photograph from 1909, and you can see benches, all wet science and no write-up stations. And then this is an image I showed earlier of a laboratory in 2012 where there are write-up desks, but they're at the dead end of narrow corridors close to hazardous materials, and then you're very separated from your fellow researchers. We started in 2000 with a custom design for the Van Andel Institute, which saw lab benches as individual pieces of large furniture that were connected along a horizontal spine for their services, and everything was distributed horizontally out from the horizontal spine. They had their own built-in lighting, and they sat under a translucent roof that provided 90% of the light during most of the days. Then in 2006, we started looking at ways to distribute services from below the floor, and that meant that you could disconnect. You didn't have to have a continuous line of benches as shown here. You could take the middle bench out because each bench was independently serviced from below the floor. So this is the notion of the vertical service module that plugged into floor boxes below the floor in a regular grid. So every 4 meters you could take out a bench or put in a bench, but it had to be on the 4-meter module. This is a close-up of the services being contained within the vertical service module. And this is the finished product. Again, it looks like a fixed lab bench, but each element, each drawer, each refrigerator, each shelf can be detached from the ones adjacent to it. And then in Bard College, we carried the idea into a teaching lab where we actually extruded. We don't have conduits. Every utility is carried in a separate extruded channel within the vertical service module. And so this is it when it's used in its research mode, but the tops of the modules can be removed when you're in a classroom mode and you still have services without the shelves for storage. So for Rockefeller, we developed the kit of parts, again, all on a 600 module that included partitions, cabinets, work surfaces, lighting, and shelving. And they all are carried on a structural concrete slab, but there's a raised floor beneath which all of the utilities run. So vibration at the lab bench is minimized because it's on the concrete structure of the building, and then you're walking on a raised floor. In this case, we used aluminum extrusions again, and each channel carried data, power, or gas, depending on which one of the 4 quadrants you were looking at. Here you see the service module connected to the concrete floor, and the raised floor, and every module can be picked up and moved 600 to another grid on the floor tile. And every service module was moved from the time the building was completed to the time the individual researchers took over their labs. The work surfaces are cantilevered and they are adjustable in height. And then the cabinets are suspended from them as well, so the floor is kept clean for easy maintenance. And then the partitions plug into the vertical service modules for their structural support to make the closed rooms. And then these are a variety of configurations that you can achieve, all with the same kit of parts, from closed offices to benches to support spaces. And here you see the laboratory, the Rockefeller University laboratory under construction with the vertical service modules and the desks and shelves installed. Write-up stations follow the same system, and you can substitute write-up stations for lab benches. And this is the occupied laboratory and support space, again separated from the write-up stations. Thank you for your attention to this presentation, and if you have any questions or comments, please feel free to contact me, Bargmann, at jdb@vinoly.com.